Um,
I'm gonna present you, Maureen.
okay.
I'm
And
gonna
then
speak into
I
you.
want,
Then
and
you
then,
can,
okay,
okay, and then you can talk, you can speak up, and then Lucila goes, okay? Other
okay.
other translators, okay? Ready? Okay. So hello again. I have the enormous pleasure, with great emotion, to present my friend from the 70s, Dr. Maureen O'Hara. Is a professor in the Department of Psychology at National University in La Jolla, California, and President Emerita of Saybrook Graduate School in San Francisco. She worked with Dr. Carl Rogers, helping to develop the person-centered approach to psychotherapy and the large group process. More recently, her writings have examined the relationship between ongoing big picture changes and internal psychological adaptation. Combining her experience as a psychotherapist, organizational consultant, and futurist, she is a frequent speaker on the evolution of new ways of being in a changing world. Specialist in higher education assessment and governance. Maureen served as a member of the Association of Psychology of American Psychology Association Division 32 Council, the Society for Humanistic Psychology. She is a distinguished clinical member of the California Association for Marriage and Family Therapy, a member of the World Academy of Art and Science, a member of the American Psychological Association, president of the Meridian Institute on Governance, Leadership, Learning, and the Future, a member of the International Forum on Futures in St. Andrews, Scotland, and president of International Forum on Futures in USA. She has books and articles published in Brazil and the United States. She influenced the entire generation of person-centered community in Brazil in the 70s and the 80s. So, uh, Maureen will speak a little bit now because she has a speech neurological problem which prevents her to present all her reflection. And we invited our mutual friend, Lucila Assunção, a philosopher and a special artist, to help us because she knows Maureen a lot. Lucila and Maureen, they are friends, and Lucila will read her speech. So, Maureen, the audience is yours now.
Thank you. I just want to say I'm sorry I can't give my talk myself. Um, but the work everyone is doing is amazing. I'm so grateful and touched that you're willing to be patient with me and to let me be here with you today. And thanks to my sister Marsha and Lucina and all my friends who are here today. Um, eu gostaria de falar em português, mas é mais difícil para mim.
I
Então,
would like to speak in Portuguese, but it's harder for me, so
mas obrigada por sua
thank you
presença.
for your presence.
Muito obrigada, Maureen. Muito obrigada pela sua determinação de vir aqui estar conosco. Muito obrigada.
Thank you, Maureen, for your determination to come here to be with us.
Ok, Lucila.
Boa tarde.
Agora, eu vou compartilhar a tela com o PowerPoint.
I'm going to share the screen with the PowerPoint.
Você tirou o meu texto.
Eu tirei seu texto?
Ficou muito grande aqui. Eu não estou conseguindo tirar,
She's having some
diminuir.
difficulties because the Zoom has gone full screen.
Espera aí, deixa eu tirar aqui.
Pronto, isso. Agora eu posso ver você e o texto, meu texto.
Ok, ok.
Quando você falar, para começar, me avisa.
Você pode começar.
When I can start, you can tell me. Okay, you can start.
Maureen,
Just a moment.
Vocês não estão vendo a tela compartilhada, estão? Não. Então, Maureen, Lucila, você tem que fazer Alt-Tab.
So, Lucila, you have to Alt-Tab
Alt,
so I can share the screen.
Alt, eu não sei o que é. Alt,
ALT.
LT e daí?
E o Tab?
Eu não sei o que é o tab. Ah, ok. Pronto, o que aconteceu?
Agora, peraí, vamos tentar. Fica aqui. Peraí. Eu tenho que fechar aqui.
Bom, eu posso ler no celular. Você pode pôr aí, eu leio no celular.
Lucila, tem como minimizar a tela do Zoom. É só você tirar da tela cheia. Tem um lugarzinho de minimizar lá no cantinho direito, em cima. Pequenininho e você consegue abrir o que você quiser.
Então, eu diminuí, eu estou vendo você e o meu texto, mas quando a Maureen põe o PowerPoint, ocupa tudo. Eu não sei por quê.
Eu vou experimentar de novo, ó.
Ele fechou. Vamos ver se eu...
Se você der 2 cliques na tela, resolve. A Lucila está muta. Mutada. Alguém?
Lucila.
Ok?
Ok.
Posso começar aqui?
Yes. Right.
Maureen, que prazer estar com você. E
It's a
que
great pleasure
honra
to be with
poder
you,
falar
Maureen.
suas palavras.
What an
Eu
honor
espero
to
estar à
speak your
altura.
words.
E
I hope
acho
to
que
be-
a nossa grande amizade nos fez muito parceiras e pensamos muito próximas.
Our
E
friendship and we
aprecio
think
o
very
grande
alike.
envolvimento e trabalho junto que você tem com o John, né? Por muitos
And
anos.
your
Né?
work
Então,
with John,
acho que eu consigo ler suas palavras e
I think I
senti-las
can read your
minhas.
words and feel them like mine.
Tem toda a confiança de talvez poder honrar você,
And maybe I
a
can
sua
honor
voz.
you and your voice.
Então, eu vou começar esse texto que se
So I will
chama...
start this text.
Well, I'm going to read in English. Academies of Hope, Making Radical Hope a Reality. Maureen O'Hara, PhD. Confronting the existential edge. This might be the most difficult presentation I ever wrote. There are two reasons for this. The first is personal. I am preparing a presentation that I know I am unlikely to be able to deliver myself. Since last July, I have been suffering from a
Lucila, por favor, vai um pouquinho devagar que o tradutor começa de novo, por favor, que para ele conseguir te seguir.
Começar de novo? É começar de novo?
Senão ele não consegue te acompanhar. Um pouquinho mais devagar, por favor.
This might be the most difficult presentation I ever wrote. There are two reasons for this. The first is personal. I am preparing a presentation that I know I'm unlikely to be able to deliver myself. Since last July, I have been suffering from a difficulty with my speech. I have been doing speech therapy, and I had hoped that by now my voice would have returned at least enough that I would be confident enough to deliver these remarks in my own voice, so I could connect heart to heart with my feelings as well as ideas. Alas, I have reluctantly come to the decision that it will work better to have someone else read the remarks while I sit alongside. I will watch the chat and reply there. Marcia will facilitate translation. Facing this new limitation has been and still is very hard for me. It has required a profound confrontation with the existential realities of being human in a human body that either slowly or rapidly will one day cease to be. I have had to accept that there are limits in life, not of my choosing, and death and decline are as human as birth and growth. It has always brought me into clear focus what a miracle it is that all the elements of a living body usually work together without our attention. It is a powerful reminder that this is the human condition for all of us. Life is uncertain, things change, we are not in control, and we must work within limits. But at the same time, I realize that I am not powerless. Even within these uncertainties and new limits, there are yet boundaries to be explored, choices to be made, and opportunities to make a difference remain. Being is always becoming. Growing through connections. So this presentation is an important pathway to regaining my sense of agency, and more importantly, my sense of connection to you, my community. I have received an enormous amount of love and support, and it makes a big difference. With your encouragement, I realize that though I may have lost my previous fluent speech, I have not lost my voice. So whether reflecting, speaking, or writing, I am still in the growth process, still learning, and still trying to make a difference. Confronting humanity existential edge. This symposium was called to consider what PCA might have to offer in a post-COVID world. I think we all expected that by now we would be past the worst of the crisis and we could come together to reflect on what we have learned. Sadly, this is not the case as we meet here. Thanks to Zoom technology, people all over the world are still suffering and dying. At the same time, fires are burning down the west coast of the US, forcing whole towns to evacuate, and there are riots in the street in major cities around the world. Countless people are out of work, and starvation is rampant. It is a nightmare scenario, and people are grieving and they are afraid. And this set of catastrophic events descend on the world already trying to cope with several other looming threats to planetary survival. We know the story is terrifying. I don't know about you, but after decades of being carried along by the deep river of hope that is the core of the person-centered approach and this global PCA community, it gets more and more difficult for me to remain in touch with the radical hope contained in the idea of an actualizing tendency. When every day I see the patterns of chaos, anger, violence, inhumanity, environmental devastation, suffering, and rising despair, this phase is challenged, and I wonder if it's naive to hope for a better future or to imagine that anything I or we can make any difference. But if I really believed that, I wouldn't be here, would I? I agree to share these ideas today because I'm convinced that the core message of Roger's work is more relevant today than it's ever been, and to urge all of us to think about ways we can extend our work in a far wider sphere, a world that is an inflection point. I don't know if I have time to read the works, but I'll go on. Rogers, the prophet. Rogers was a prophet, and like all prophets, he heard the voices and movements that most don't hear. Working in many different spheres, he listened deeply to the sounds of a world undergoing massive changes, and instead of focusing on what many of his peers thought of as cultural decline, he saw the promise of a new world that was underpinned by a shift in our ways of thinking and new ways of acting. He wanted his work to provide a pathway to that new world. Rogers was not naive. He was a utopian in an era of cynical manipulators. Despite his admitted fear that in the near term, humanity had major challenges to face and may well be heading for what he called a new dark age, he nevertheless believed that radical hope was still justified. PCA was always intended as more than a method of psychotherapy. Like many of his humanistic peers, Rogers was offering a new philosophical paradigm or conceptual framework that would inevitably change the world to make it more aligned with an actualizing tendency that he believed animated the universe. Reviewing the radical changes that had taken place in his lifetime, which spanned much of the 20th century, Rogers came to believe that a dramatic cultural shift was already underway, not only in the external world, but in the inner world of the human psyche. This was not just a change within the existing dominant conceptual paradigm of the Western world, but was a deep transformation in the basic assumptions upon which Western civilization had been based for centuries. This shift was changing not just what we do, but how we understand ourselves, the world, each other, and the future. Rogers and the other founders of humanistic psychology had seen two global wars, the Nazi Holocaust and nuclear devastation, and believed that humanity would not survive if it did not change its way of thinking and acting. But Rogers went further. He believed that along with changing the world, we would have to change ourselves. Persons of tomorrow. Every society has its own particular view of what it means to be a person. These views vary greatly across time and across cultures. When a culture changes, so does its concept of personhood. Anxiety and cultural change. In 1969 and again in 1980, Rogers speculated about the impact of a radically changing world on psychology reality and our concept of what it means by personhood. He wondered out loud, what should we expect of persons of tomorrow? Change at the level of a culture inevitably creates instability and uncertainty. Many regarded the cultural unraveling of the 60s with extreme anxiety, fears of social upheaval, loosening social mores, political dissent, loss of social control. But true to his lifelong emphasis on growth rather than pathology, Rogers focused on the creative and emancipatory possibilities this countercultural loosening presented. Though then, as now, reactionary forces resisted these movements, sometimes with violence, Rogers heard hope in the voices and choices of those he met at workshops and in encounter group. He saw a new generation seeking radically new ways of being as they responded to the challenges and uncertainties of their times. It was this prophetic sense of radical hope of the future as radically open and reality as something, not as something fixed and eternal, but as an evolving story for which we are all responsible, that first drew me to the person-centered approach and still guides my work. Powerful times. I think it is fair to say that the world has not gotten less turbulent in the last 50 years. On the contrary, it has become more chaotic and incoherent, and people are far less optimistic that they were a generation than they were a generation ago. Should there be only 4? Even before COVID, humanity was already facing a cascade of interlocking crises that pose an existential threat to human survival. In many leadership circles, the situation is coming to be called VUCA world, volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous, with multiple level crises going on at the same time. This map is not working. I can't find myself everywhere. In our work, we identify 4 different levels at which VUCA world affects us. There is the visible crisis, which we see all around us every day, intensified now by the COVID-19 pandemic. Communities are crumbling, nothing works anymore. The system and institutions we used to take for granted for a stable society are falling across the globe. There is rising inequality, racial strife, millions of refugees, global crime, rising authoritarianism, and decay of the rule of law or law. The list is familiar, daunting, and gets longer every day. People feel helpless. Complicating this further is a conceptual crisis. Core assumptions about reality are no longer fixed. Conceptual maps don't fit the world we now live in. It's too complex for reductionism and rationalist models. 10 minutes on Facebook will show you that there is no longer a reliable source of authority to turn to. Science, church, who everyone will trust. Scientific knowledge has become weapon-sized and is no longer trusted. People argue about COVID, masks, climate data, conspiracies. There is no shared narrative that the majority agree with. And why should they? The information load is so overwhelming, sometimes described as drinking from the fire hose. Many of us never know more than one small piece of the truth. We can no longer safely distinguish fact from deep fake or manipulated reality. We must make our way with only fragments and do the best we can. And whether we like it or not, things do not get better with more information. They get worse. This creates cognitive dissonance on a societal level. This leads to a cultural crisis. Humans cannot tolerate a VUCA world for long. Eventually, they will move to reduce the complexity and impose some patterning. One of the commonest ways is to look for others who see the world the same way and separate themselves from those who challenge their truth, creating homogeneous subcultures of like-minded people, us and them, and now remarkably easy thanks to social media. Gradually, cultures disintegrate and social solidarity evaporates. It is a small step from here to us who are virtuous versus them who are evil. Us who are virtuous versus them who are evil. And so we find ourselves in an existential crisis. Disruptions of this magnitude strike at the heart of our frameworks for reality. We lose our center. What does it mean to be a person in this world? Who am I? Who are we? What am I worth? What anchors my identity, my morality, my sense of purpose, my understanding of what we owe each other? What are my rights and yours? What do we owe other living beings, the planet, the future? In the current upheaval, the very definition of what we mean personally and collectively by the idea of a person must be reconsidered. Though there have been civilization shifts before, this is the first time in human history in which the survival of the planet is uncertain, and we are destroying the planet we live on. As Einstein said, problems cannot be solved at the same level of consciousness at which they were created. We are in a new world, but we have few guideposts to help us travel. We are all immigrants. If we are to survive these powerful times and learn to live fully human lives, we will need to learn our way forward into a new kind of consciousness, one that is advanced enough to operate in the new VUCA circumstance we have created. Person-centered practice provides a process for moving beyond the levels that created this crisis. We know this can be done because our ancestors, whose worlds we inherited, faced similar civilizations disruptions and survived to build better worlds for their children. Now, it's our time to respond to this accelerating crisis with the kind of growth that changes not just what we do, but changes who we are. We must have people develop their psychosocial capacities and become broadest persons of tomorrow. PCA treasure. The good news is that within PCA community, there is a great storehouse of collected treasure. We have decades of experience of helping individuals and groups turn crisis into opportunity and to build communities that support human growth and potential. As Rogers, the prophet, told us in his last book in 1980, PCA at the service of the world. If the time comes when our culture tires of endless homicidal feuds, despair of the use of force and war as a means of bringing peace, becomes discontent with the half-lives that is its men are living, only then will our culture seriously look for alternatives. When that time comes, they will not find a void. They will discover that there are ways of facilitating the resolution of feuds. They will find there are ways of building communities without sacrificing the potential creativity of the person. They will realize that there are ways already tried out on a small scale of enhancing learning, of moving towards new values, of raising consciousness to new levels. They will find there are ways of being that do not involve power over persons and groups. They will discover that harmonious community can be built on the basis of mutual respect and enhanced personal growth. As humanistic psychologists with a person-centered...
Lucila, se você puder pausar só pouquinho, que o nosso tradutor...
Quer que eu comece a voltar pouquinho?
Acompanhar, tá bom?
Desculpe my running and Portuguese accent. They will find there are...
Desculpa.
Sorry.
Mas,
What?
se você
Oi.
Para o primeiro slide do texto, por favor.
Esse aqui?
O Lucas está
The
pedindo
time
aqui.
comes.
Which one did you want me to
Esse.
start?
This one. This one.
Which one? I'm covering it. Show me again.
Era aquele lá, Marcos. Ele está lendo aqui.
Okay, if the time comes when our culture tires of endless homicidal feuds, despair of the use of force and war as a means of bringing peace, becomes discontent with the half-lives that its members are living, only then will our culture seriously look for alternatives. When that time comes, they will not find a void. They will discover that there are ways of facilitating the resolution of feuds. They will find there are ways of building communities without sacrificing the potential creativity of the person. They will realize that there are ways already tried out on a small scale of enhancing learning, of moving towards new values, of raising consciousness to new levels. They will find that there are ways of being that do not involve power over persons and groups. They will discover that harmonious community can be built on the basis of mutual respect and enhanced personal growth. As humanistic psychologists with a person-centered philosophy, we have created working models on a small scale which our culture can use when it is ready. Rogers, 1980. So, putting PCA to work on a larger scale. 20 years ago, I received an invitation from Graham Leicester in Scotland to join the International Futures Forum, an international nonprofit think tank that aimed to find out what it takes to live well in a VUCA world and how can we make a difference even though the barriers to doing so are very high. I was the only psychologist in the group. The others came from traditional disciplines like economics, philosophy, governance, and business. Discussions of psychology and conscience were new and frankly suspect. At first, like true sons of the Enlightenment, they were suspicious of subjectivity, feelings, and especially intuition, and were more comfortable with objectivity, models, and abstractions. The world consciousness was too counterculture for them. Some members avoided feelings and non-rational ways of knowing, calling them, only partly in jest, Californication. They were more used to trusting quantitative science rather than qualitative. And our conversations were more debate than dialogue. But at the same time, they were human beings living the same turbulence as everyone else. They also wanted to make a positive difference in the world. But they wanted to start with hard evidence. We had in common that we were open to the idea that the world's crises were at a level of complexity that was calling for a new world view, a paradigm shift, a change in consciousness. So we went looking for evidence by studying places where this cultural shift might already be happening, even in places that far away from California. We're far away from California. And we found them, lots of them. We found examples of projects in the UK, US, Indian, Latin America, Africa, and Europe, where despite many barriers, where challenges were complex and seemingly unsurmountable, transformative learning and cultural change had been achieved. We came to think of this project as Academies of Hope. The projects were diverse and included a large urban renewal project in Falkirk, Scotland, a mutual care project for lonely elders, the creation of self-care kit bags now used in schools throughout Scotland, a citizens organization in a large Indian slum, a US university, a dialogue project in Ireland, as well as arts organizations, the National Health Service and government agencies. Our methodology included visiting these projects and listening to the experience of those involved. An important part of the approach was to closely shadow participants and successful leaders of these organizations on the job, to participate in their process where possible, listening to their ways of being and being with their colleagues in their settings, trying to understand what made it possible for them to thrive and make a difference. What were the secret ingredients? We have described these findings in detail in our book, Dancing at the Edge, but none of it will surprise you. There were two main factors. One, developmental, and the other, the organizational or community context. Rogers' persons of tomorrow, open to experience, desire for authenticity, skepticism about science and technology, seeks holiness, wish for intimacy, capacity to live with change and ambiguity, caring and altruistic, reverence for nature, preference for egalitarian and flexible institutions, internal flame.
Lucila.
Woo!
Oh, calm down.
Sorry.
Porque você está indo um pouquinho rápido para os tradutores, mesmo tendo o texto. Você pode repetir esse slide, open to experience, desire for authenticity.
Sorry, I will repeat. So Rogers' persons of tomorrow, open to experience, desire for authenticity, skepticism about science and technology, seeks wholeness, wish for intimacy, capacity to live with change and ambiguity, caring and altruistic, reverence for nature, preference for egalitarian, flexible institutions, internal frame of moral reference, less materialistic, yearning for spiritual connection, mystical awareness of unity and harmony in the universe. We were impressed over and over that the people who seemed to be thriving and making a humane difference were more like Rogers' persons of tomorrow than most of their colleagues and peers. Their ability to stay sane and be effective was not just a matter of funding, techno expertise, or the right management skills. It was much more a function of their ability to be aware, to connect, adapt, and to respond to their situation, to tolerate complexity with humility, authenticity, and balance. They trusted the inherent potential for transformation in themselves, in their co-workers, and above all else, they had faith in the future, even the most challenging situations. The other key factor was that they created around them, in their environment, the necessary conditions for their employees, colleagues, clients, citizens to develop their own higher potentials too. They created settings where everyone was safe to take risks and stretch, learning together how to live in VUCA world. They create academies of hope. Growing through the crisis. The good news is that we in the PCA community know how to nurture human potential. We have seen on the level of individual clients and the macro level of organizations, cultures, and even civilizations. Human beings are learning specialists, and in the right conditions, we expand our capacities and adapt to our new conditions. We can learn and grow into them. The capacities needed to thrive in the 21st century are not mechanistic, technical skills that can be applied according to manuals and fixed rules. They are qualities of being, of persons as a whole. Becoming a person of tomorrow is not like assembling the parts of a machine. It is difficult to be compassionate, for example, without at the same time showing a capacity for empathy, authenticity, humility, and all other qualities. 21st century competencies must be appreciated holistically. Their expression will often seem countercultural to a dominant culture that works with abstractions, models, and metrics, and suggests that competencies can be distinguished one from another, developed in isolation, and mastered one stage at a time. We in IFF believe instead, as did Rogers, that these qualities are innate human potentials waiting to emerge. They are present in any human system, individual or collective. They simply require the right enabling conditions, challenging settings, life experience, and imagination to be called forth and developed through practice. As PCA practitioners, we know those conditions include acceptance, empathy, psychological security, respect, freedom to be authentic and congruent, conceptual coherence, cultural awareness, and understanding different ways of knowing. These conditions are the heart of PCA community, encounter and counseling. Signs of hope. I suggest that despite how dark things seem today, there are many signs of hope. We already see new kinds of persons, many of them young, emerging all around us, who are more at home in the new complexity and have greater capacity to be effective in the face of the emergencies we describe. A recent study of over 35,000 social change initiatives worldwide identified that most common keywords in their mission states, identified the most common keywords in their mission states. This suggests that the paradigm shift is already gaining strength. So the words are awareness, participation, empathy, empowerment, authenticity, transparency, listening, communication, appreciation, dialogue, flexibility, tradition, ritual, mutual respect, deliberation, self-governance, wisdom of the group, transformative conversation, collective intelligence, respectful relationships, and non-violent justice. So how can this new kind of person, the persons of tomorrow, already in our midst and in ourselves now, be encouraged, supported, and put into action? How can I start an Academy of Hope? We don't have time here to describe some of the pathway you might choose, and I refer you to our IFF books and the IFF website, internationalfuturesforum.com, for more ideas. But here's some guidelines for how you might start a project that could become an Academy of Hope. Most importantly, it does not work to create training programs in a classroom and then send people out to apply what they've learned. This is an old paradigm that worked while the world was simple or stable, but not in VUCA. In today's fast-moving world, we develop ourselves by taking action, however small, that is designed to create change. We act, we reflect on what happened, we learn, we grow in an ongoing transformative process. The key ingredients are the need for partners, staying faithful to core principles, and flexible in application, being open to learning as you go. Be humble, always seek feedback, always stay human. Shall I read this another, getting started within an Academy of Hope? How is our time?
No, just the slide.
I didn't get what you said. Shall I read?
No.
Okay.
No, I don't have this slide.
Okay.
Do you want me to read, Maureen?
No.
Okay. So I'll go on. It is my deep belief that as the old world crumbles, a new world is being born. Whether it is a better, more human and life-supporting world, or a worse, degraded world will depend on what we do in the next few years. I have a great faith in the collective wisdom of this PCA community. I urge us now to turn our attention to this larger task and consciously reframe what we do. Whether you work with individuals in pain, training groups, encounters, writing papers, creating social service agencies, coaching CEOs, or are an activist. Think of what you are doing in a bigger way.
O barulho do vídeo, tá vendo?
Remember the old story of the whose son asked him why he's chipping at stones. The father replied, "Son, I'm not chipping stones, I'm building a cathedral." It's time for the PCA community to remember its activist roots. We are called to facilitate the emergence of a new civilization to replace the one that is dying and to base it in a new paradigm that puts consciousness of persons and all life at its center. In 1980, Rogers, the prophet, said, "The many convergent trends constitute a paradigm shift. We will try, of course, to live in our familiar world, just as people lived upon a flat world long after we knew it was round. But as these new ways of conceptualizing the person and the world sink in, becoming increasingly the basis of our thinking and our lives, transformation becomes inevitable." Carl Rogers, 1980. And I will end with my favorite quote from Arundhati Roy. "Not only is a new world possible, she is on her way. I can hear her breathing." And I believe it is. Thank you. And I believe in you, Maureen.
Wow. I have to breathe to go on.
Me too. I could say add a little thing, if I may.
Yes.
I wrote Maureen with a citation that I love. That's intrinsic hope is life's love for itself. So I think that hope is life wanting to know itself at each time, at each moment, in each circumstances. Thanks, Maureen, for instigating, again, breathing hope in our lives.
Thank you for reading my words so much.
Lucila, muito obrigada.
Thank you very much, Lucila.
My honor.
Pela sua colaboração.
Thank you for your collaboration
Trazer as palavras
in bringing
da Maureen.
Maureen's words and reflections
No seu coração.
that I'm sure resonated in your heart as it resonated in my heart and as it resonated in John's Wood heart.
Presenteada por vocês.
I feel very gifted by your presence.
E eu vou.
And I'm going.
There is a lot of comments here.
There's a lot of comments, Maureen.
I think we have many time to make questions and answers, but I think that you'd like me to read the comments, will you?
I can read them myself.
Oh, yes. I'm sorry. Yes. Even even in Portuguese, you can read them.
Yeah, when I am emotional, my voice disappears, so it's hard.
Yes, I know. I know.
I have to stop being emotional.
Yes.
uh, Thank you so much. Mhm.
Maureen, may I talk a little bit about your book, Dance in the Edge?
Of
And
course.
okay, I'm going to speak in Portuguese and I ask the translator to translate me. É,
So, darling,
Maureen, dos livros dele.
Maureen, one of her books is Dancing at the Edge, that was just translated to Spanish on Argentina. Dançando em Bordas, I think it's the name. And Wagner Durange, a colleague of mine, our friend, and his editorial Matilha, is translating it to Portuguese. I don't know how the translation is gonna be, so the Brazilian community will be gifted by the translation to Portuguese of her book to Portuguese.
Maureen, muito obrigada por ter vindo até aqui, por ter
Thank you,
preparado
Maureen, for coming here and to have prepared this beautiful speech
orientar um pouco nesse
to guide us a little bit on this
difícil tempo que
hard world,
nós
on
estamos.
this very difficult time that we are living now.
Como uma das organizadoras do evento,
I, as one of the organizers of the event, I feel very gifted by these two days
com pessoas de diferentes culturas,
with people from different cultures, with different reflections, but all of them related and,
pela abordagem
and coming together with ACP and beyond, on PCA and beyond. Everyone is bringing their viewpoint,
sem
their preferred reflections without being naive, but all very optimist, very positive, with drops of hope,
ou apesar
even though
da situação
and
que estamos atravessando.
we are living such a difficult situation.
Peço que você
I'm feeling very grateful and very gifted by this.
quer fazer
I'm gonna be here opening to people who would like to speak a little, make a statement or bring some information that you think it's good. I feel
iniciais na
the
realização
initial propositions for this seminar, I think we achieved them all. We
porque
got a good,
estamos com uma boa equipe.
because we have a good team. Besides me and Andrea Neres, we have our, 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 our very dear girls, Natalia Elias and Marisa Lima, and also the translation team, Luca Darcuri, Carol Werba, her daughter Jennifer, and Antonio Monteiro,
Nos ajudando
and also helping us with the recording and the infrastructure, there is Laura.
projeto, convidando
So
especialmente os jovens, porque
we were inviting mainly the young people because it's enough for the old people to be just me, and the young people are a little bit sharper and they know more of technology,
para fazer o que
and they are helping me to do everything I'm doing here. A lot of information coming here extended to me. I'm very grateful to this person, people that are here. I'm very grateful to every speakers that were here, including Lucila, that
se organizar e trazer essas
organized themselves to come with their most recent reflections. And I'm very grateful to all of you that are here, that that had such intense moments. It was a lot of time here, and most of the people stayed here for the full time. And this is very difficult in this virtual world to stay so much time together. To me, it's really, the time was really fast passing for me. I would stay here 5 more hours. It was a great time for me. I really, from the bottom of my heart, I would like to thank everyone from all countries that are here present. We had some little difficulties with the translation or the sound, but I think that this happens, it's natural. I think we are becoming lectured on this virtual world. We don't know all the technologies of this virtual world, so we need to learn from this technology with this virtual world. Because liking or not, this virtual world exists. So I think we have to learn to how to live with it without forgetting all the potentials of the presence world. I really miss my son and my friends. I see my son one time by week, but my friends and other relatives, it's very hard to be secluded. But it's a hardship that we all have to face. So I really thank you all and open the mic for those who, please, Andrea, open the mic for the people who want to speak anything, because I am really emotional.